Now, if I didn't know better, I'd assume it was a legal requirement that if you mentioned Resident Evil Outbreak, then someone has to mention how it was ahead of its time. Put a penny in that jar. Jokes aside, Resident Evil Outbreak and Outbreak File Number 2 were at the time and still remain the Biohazard series' strangest pair of spin-offs. Cooperative online survival horror. A unique set of characters making their way through every part of Raccoon City against the clock. But what if there was more? Greetings Earthlings, I'm KDB for First Aid Spray, and this is the true story of Resident Evil Outbreak File Number 3. Network Biohazard went into production in 2001 and was helmed by Noritaka Funimizu, a long-standing Capcom employee having started working for the company in 1985, with various arcade titles. Shinji Mikami, the godfather of the Resident Evil series, was tapped to direct the spin-off, but had to step away from the project to concentrate on developing Resident Evil 4, and thus the role went to Ishihiro Sasaki, I'm probably butchering these names, whose previous credits included Power Stone and Techromancer. Funimizu and Sasaki led a team from the Capcom production Studio 1, and immediately started to identify what would need to be changed and tweaked from the existing Biohazard formula to fit a multiplayer experience. Instead of one long campaign, Network Biohazard would instead be made up of multiple scenarios that, whilst not short, were more manageable than your average 8-hour experience. 20 scenarios were drafted in the early stages, each with their own supervisor, and all of them taking place in and around Raccoon City to tie the game to the existing narrative. The public unveiling of Resident Evil Online, as it was known then, was at Sony's E3 2002 press conference. It demonstrated the core gameplay loop and differences, such as the infection gauge and possibility of succumbing to the T-virus, as well as the ability to play and work together with 3 other friends. In the following spring, the game's name was changed to Resident Evil Outbreak, to not only highlight the former features, but also to take a small step back from the online name. Originally, Outbreak would have been online only, but in order to increase sales, it was decided that the scenarios should be playable offline with computer AI partners. Then again, if you are unlucky like us to live in the PAL region, the original Outbreak would have had 0 online functionality whatsoever anyway, so you might be left like Jim, exclaiming, "My life is shit." During the game's production, Studio One were clearly a tad overzealous. Not only with these 20 scenarios and everything that came along with them, unique enemies, unique stages, various cutscenes, probably struggled to be contained on a single PS2 disc, but the game had a strict deadline. Considering that the structure of development broke up designers to work on their own different scenarios, work had been started on many that wouldn't make the final cut. By September of 2003 at Tokyo Game Show, just months from the final release, it was in stone that Resident Evil Outbreak would feature 5 scenarios: Outbreak, Below Freezing Point, The Hive, Hellfire, and Decisions. And even then, some of the scenarios were edited down. For example, promo material from the game shows players outside of Raccoon General Hospital, something not possible in the final release. Despite being early to the party with an online gaming craze, the name value of Resident Evil and the intriguing concept propelled the game to 1.45 million global sales, a positive result. A few months after the release of the game, Capcom announced that Studio One was working on a follow-up. They picked 5 more scenarios from the presumably still warm cutting room floor and developed Wild Things, Underbelly, Flashback, Desperate Times, and End of the Road for Resident Evil Outbreak File Number 2. The second game, however, failed to make the same impact as the original and did not manage to hit the 1 million global sales mark. According to Funimizu, whilst there was some talk at Capcom about more sequels for the spin-off series, especially considering there are presumably 10 more half-developed scenario ideas, the side series quietly faded from discussion altogether. For what it's worth, let's get this out the way. There is no Outbreak File Number 3. This is simply what Resident Evil fans refer to as the massive missing content from the Outbreak series. Heck, as far as we know, there were never any concrete plans for a third entry in the series. It's just that further Outbreak sequels would be easy to develop for, considering they all use the same engine, characters, and so on. However, over the years, information about missing pieces have come to light and come to the internet. Through magazines, interviews, and more specifically fan hacking, we've been lucky to see some of the ideas that were part of Network Biohazard's development. So, as Barry Burton might say, Take a look at this. That was a terrible impression. Let's delve into those scenarios first. The one we can see the most of is A Day in Raccoon, both the name of the motel that the scenario is set around and presumably the name of the scenario also. Plenty of screenshots of this exist that were shown to publications during the game's production, as well as a little bit of footage also. The stage seemed to feature zombies and zombie dogs, as well as a unique NPC, Mickey, who owned the motel, and by the end of things would have met a grisly end, judging by an extracted character model. The key objective for the stage was apparently collecting VHS tapes. Remember them? Way before Resident Evil 7 made it cool. The next doesn't have a name, but is more often referred to as Raccoon Pier. A single screenshot, perhaps its scenario select icon, has been found that implies its location, but more than that, one area of this stage can be found buried on the disc, and, using GameShark, can be walked around in by very keen Outbreak fans. It's not confirmed that this is the scenario it's associated with, but it's a good guess considering the nautical theme. Another guess is that this scenario would have seen a very welcome return from a classic Resident Evil BOW in the form of Neptune, whose model can be found tucked away in the code too. Finally, there are rumours of a Raccoon High School scenario, but nothing concrete as far as this is concerned. However, we can make a few more assumptions on scenarios based on other content seen in screenshots and found on the two games' discs. For one, there are a lot of missing characters that can be hacked back into the game. Several civilians, such as Keith the plumber, Gary, who has an uninjured and an injured character model, and Kate, who is definitely a character the designers had plans for, since her files are actually given her name rather than just Man 1 and Woman 1 like the others. According to Alison Court, who worked as a voice director for the game, Kate would have had a boyfriend character who turned into a licker. Well, if that doesn't constitute a breakup, I don't know what does. Two other cut characters were also interlinked. Mary, who had a short profile published in the Japanese gaming magazine Famitsu, was the girlfriend of UBCS soldier Mac Dowell. Mac himself is actually one of 4 hackable UBCS servicemen, along with Matt, Clint and Billy. No, not that one. It's safe to assume that there was to be a scenario that focused on the players encountering these guys, although what exactly the plans for that were are still unknown. Similarly, there are 4 USS soldiers in the code: Derek, Miguel, Conrad, and of course the all-important Hunk. Again, we have no idea what role they would have played, but considering Hunk's place in the story, it's likely that the scenario would have been focused around Umbrella's attempted acquisition of the G-Virus and ensuing battle with the mutated Dr. Birkin. In fact, Birkin can be seen in the game's original reveal trailer, despite not being in either release, and a model of the monstrosity with some very basic coding exists in the game that makes this pretty close to a certainty. There were a handful of other cut enemies that can be found in the code of either or both Outbreak games, most of which have character models with little to no animation. These include an infected pitcher plant, a grub, an obese nude zombie, hello, an alternate tyrant design that is much closer to T-002 than Thanatos, and most interestingly of all, the G-Dog, a G-Virus infected pooch. It's impossible to know for sure which of these are placeholder, cut from scenarios we can play, or were designed for scenarios that never saw the light of day. Despite all of the things we can see through artwork, pre-release material, and left in the game's data, it's certainly possible that unfinished designs and work exist somewhere for this theoretical file number 3. Whilst we wouldn't hold our breath to ever see them again, it's even less likely than Capcom re-releasing the games that they did make. You can never say never with these things. If the Resident Evil on Game Boy Color escapade has taught us anything, it's that. So what do you think about Outbreak file number 3? What kind of scenarios would you have liked to have seen in a Dream threequel? Let us know in the comments below. Subscribe to see new Resident Evil focused content on the regular, join our Discord, find us on the social medias. I've been KDB, and I've never played Outbreak File 1 or 2. Sorry.